White space is the empty or unmarked areas around and between visual elements. It doesn't necessarily have to be white, but it's any space that is not occupied by a design. What's up? My name's Ty. I am a graphic designer. I create logos and identities, and I'm going to talk about white space. This is one of my favorite principles in graphic design, and I can showcase it with just a square here. So, white space, like I mentioned, is the space, the empty or unmarked space around elements on a design. We can use white space in a lot of different ways to enhance a design. So, for example, we can create groups just by playing with the positioning and the white space of elements. So if I put these two squares right next to each other, there's a lot of white space in this canvas here. So now these, we look at these two squares and we consciously think that these are a group. They belong next to each other. If I take this guy and I come all the way over here to the opposite side, there's no longer that sense that they need to be grouped. Now if I take this guy and I duplicate it and I put one next to him, now we have something else that's interesting here. So we have two squares that appear to be grouped, and this guy is an outcast. He's out on his own, and that is dictated by the big amount of white space here between these two. So we can use white space to create conscious groups, intentional groups of elements on a design. So this is an element called proximity, and proximity is just elements that are close together. They're seen as a group, while elements that are spaced out are seen as separate. Now, in general, it's advisable when grouping items to keep it around 3 to 4 max. If I have 6 here in one area, it gets a little bit cluttered. So instead, I can just take these two and separate them, and now it feels more distinct. And it also simplifies it a little bit as well. So we can use white space to group items, but we can also use white space to create structure. So if I have 3 squares here, now they do form a group here, but it also forms a hierarchy. So because this is on top of this, because this is on top of all of these other rectangles, it creates a hierarchy, meaning that this is more important than this, which is more important than this. So there's an order here. It's like 1, 2, 3. And that's because here in the West, we read from left to right, top to bottom. So we use that to dictate a hierarchy or a level of importance in a design. Now, that is all because there's this little bit of space separating these two elements. If I completely close that space, since there's no white space, it's seen as one element. So then this becomes 1 and 2, like that. Now we could change the color of this, like let's just make this a slightly darker gray, like so. So now we still have like a 1, 2, and 3, but because there's no white space here, these are kind of seen in the mind as a single element, as one thing. It's a group, but it's a tighter group because there's no white space in this area. Now, a slightly more practical application of this hierarchy is if we position these in the center, like so, and we bring this guy down. Let's say that we have an element like this. So we're using super basic shapes to make a point here, but what we have here is a hierarchy, kind of like we did before. So this is 1, 2, 3 from top to bottom, but because this is actually bigger, it changes the hierarchy. It becomes 1, 2, and 3. Now what drives home that this is the third element is this space between this box here. So because there's so much space here compared to here, this separates this element from these two, which makes it third, which means it's less important, or even it's either less important or it places more emphasis on it. It kind of depends on what we put in this box here. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, so here's a super basic design using the exact same layout that I had a split second ago. So here's what we have. I'm going to explain it a little bit. We're using white space to achieve a hierarchy here. So there's a difference in the spacing from this and this. So just comparing these circles that I've drawn, you can see how much larger this white space is compared to this. Now by doing that, what we do is we're subconsciously saying, we're saying without saying it, that these two elements relate to each other. And in fact, the text here and the picture, they support each other. So when you read sunglasses and then you see the picture close by, you immediately look for the sunglasses. That's what happens there. And then since we have this space here, what it does is it lets the design breathe a bit so that your eyes travel down the page to this button, which is what we want you to do. It's the call to action here. It's buy now. So if this was like on a website advertisement, the white space here allows the design to breathe and then the eye to travel down to the call to action. Now, if we were to change this and put this right here, notice how that changes the feeling of the design. It makes this feel more urgent. Makes it feel, to me, it feels like I'm almost subconscious or insecure about you purchasing my thing. By putting the button so close, it's like, please buy this now. But by separating this, there's more confidence in the design because I'm like, hey, I'm not worried. You're going to buy my sunglasses because your eye has traveled all the way down the page. You've spent time on this design. You're more likely to buy this. That's how I think about this at the very least. Now, something we could do to change it is we could bring this together like that. And we could say that, oh, this, because it's closer, it makes this feel more applicable or more relevant. But because there's so much extra white space on the outside here, it kind of, to me, this muddies it up. It's too close. And so there's not enough breathing room because there's so much breathing room out here and in here and through here. And then there's no breathing room here. It makes the design feel just off or weird or claustrophobic, even though there's only 3 elements on the page. By spacing it out, but still keeping the white space distance here greater than here, these 2 elements remain connected. So that's an example of how we can use white space, the emptiness between the design, to dictate the hierarchy. So we're going 1, 2, 3, or sometimes 1, 2, 3. But this is still the third one. We're using white space for the hierarchy, and we're also using white space to create groups. So this is a group, and that is a group. Now this is the type of design that would work better for a slightly more premium or maybe a modern brand of sunglasses. But if we change this copy and this picture to something different, we would have different needs for the white space in this design. Let me show you what I mean. Here is the same layout, just with different copy and different picture. So we're advertising a concert here, and we have all of this white space here. So what do we think about concerts? Is there a lot of breathing room in a mosh pit? You know, especially taking a look at the picture here, we've got this guy that's screaming and this dude riffing on a guitar. In fact, I can zoom this out a little bit to show that better. So we need to make the white space and the design fit the message. And the message that this picture sends is that this is going to be rowdy, this is going to be rambunctious, this is going to be crazy, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be loud. And so we need to reflect that in the design here, which means that all of this white space that we have is just too much. So here's how I would correct it. First of all, we're going to pair these 2 things, and we're going to bring this closer. Now the reason for that, and the reason why I think in this case it doesn't scream as desperate, is because of the context of the image and the copy. So putting the ticket button closer to the picture doesn't seem as desperate because it's meant to be a little bit louder and a little bit more rambunctious, which means it's going to be closer together, and that's an expectation that is set from the first 2 elements that we see. So because we see these 2 elements first, seeing a third little bit closer, it's not so surprising that it's close up. Contrasting that to the sunglasses example from before, that's why I think there's a difference there. Now, I would also adjust the scale of all of these things. So if I bring this down, I'm going to increase the scale here. where this is probably going to be pretty big. And so is this picture. Let's just make it fit. There we go. We'll say that that works for now. And what we could even do is cut out some of the white space and have an overlapping element to drive it home even more. I might place this. Now, if we look at the picture, there's a main focal point is here. This is where all of the interest is. And this, for the most part, is empty. Yeah, we have this guy here, but the light on these two dudes is much brighter than they are on this guy. And so, for all intents and purposes, this is practically empty. So I can take this button and I can either put it up in here, put it in here, put it here. I can even overlap it with the photo like this. I would even maybe change this background into something more. We'll just go a light orange for now. Won't worry about it too much. But we've cut down drastically on the amount of white space in this design. And because of that, I think we've created something much more applicable towards this style of poster and for the intent of advertising this concert and getting people to buy tickets for this concert. Now, I'm not going to say that this is like perfect or the best thing ever, but I do think that it is better than the example that we had earlier. We've cut down on the white space. We've almost eliminated it here, and we've reduced it drastically by overlapping the button over the picture. So we're using white space for different purposes because we have different needs. So ultimately, there's like a scale for your white space. And there's different, depending on the needs of the design, there's different ways to use the white space to achieve your purposes. So if we have, I think probably 4. So let's say on one end is 0 white space, and on the other end is lots of white space. It's probably better just to use the text tool. Switch my font real quick. Okay, so on one end we have 0, on the other hand we have a lot of white space. So starting from the bottom, we'll just say the types of designs that would have less white space would be the ones that want to be quirky or fun or loud. Things like a concert. Now, moving up a level, we might want things that are bold or intense or energetic. For this type of design, think about a movie poster. A movie poster would probably fit into this space where there's not going to be a whole lot of white space. Then we move up into here, which is more moderate space. So this would be something that wants to have a little bit more clarity. They might want to appear a little bit more trustworthy, or they want to show that they put a lot of thought into what they're talking about. So it's more thoughtful. So we're moving away from the quirky and the fun area of white space, and we're moving a little bit more towards refinement, you could say. And then I'm going to shrink this down. It's kind of small, but it works. Okay, and then at the very top where there's just tons of white space, we want the design to feel calm. It might seem like it's got luxury, maybe even a bit modern, especially like the modern style is very lots of white space in modern art styles. Think about modern interior design, modern clothing, things like that. They're more plain, they're more calm, little bit more simple. So this is the scale. So on this side we have 0 white space, which kind of means everything is close together, and then we move up a level. In fact, let me depict it this way. Okay, so we have little to none white space, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then just tons of white space. I don't know if this type of scale helps clarify it. So that is that's pretty basic. That's the basics of white space in graphic design. I hope this made sense. And if you want to go see how I balance a logo, which incorporates white space into the balancing, you can check out this video here. Thanks for watching, and peace out.